Hello, Canada. Hello, United States of America. Greetings to all of you here with me in Panama and all over the planet. My name is Kevin J. Johnston. This is the Kevin J. Johnston Show that runs every Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, where we continue to talk about banking, politics, money, and the crazy stuff going on all over this rock we call home. We have special guest tonight, Rob Anders, joining us, who is a former member of parliament and has had the extreme displeasure of being less than 2 feet away from jihadi Justin Trudeau. He's a former member of parliament of 18 years in Canada and has amazing stories to tell. And tonight we're going to be talking about BRICS, B-R-I-C-S, the currency that could crush the United States dollar. But there's a lot of things, provisos, there's a lot of stuff you got to know. Just tons of stuff that you absolutely got to know. However, I know you need to know my opinion for some reason about the Tyson fight. I have got so many emails about that. It's unbelievable. So let's talk about the Tyson fight, but let's not do it for too long. Pure crap, trash, garbage. If it was writing, it would be called screed. If it was a terrible morning, it would be called diarrhea. Jake Paul, let's just cover him for a quick second here. Jake Paul is a big mouth who rose to fame a little bit at age 14 on YouTube. So he's a big mouth kid that got too rich too quick and didn't know what to do with it. Eventually, him and his brother Logan, they got involved with some marketeers. So it's not like these two cooked up all their marketing plans on their own. They actually did go through professional marketing companies to take advantage of the fact that their YouTube channel was huge. And really, I don't know why it got so big. What were they doing? It was pranks, swearing, swearing. That's pretty much all the two of them were famous for. And one of the brothers got in trouble because they went to Japan and they saw somebody who had committed suicide hanging, and they were cracking jokes. I forget which one of the two brothers did it. I don't care because I wouldn't watch their nonsense anyway. So Jake Paul, with the help of these professional marketeers, cooked up this event where he gets to fight Mike Tyson, former world champion Mike Tyson. Now, Mike Tyson is someone that I do like. Jake Paul, I can't stand. He's a big mouth, but everything that comes out of his mouth is nonsense. None of it's interesting. None of it's educational. Can't stand the guy. So I was cheering for the black guy, just for the record, everybody, because I like Mike Tyson. When Mike Tyson made his debut at age 19 on the professional circuit, I was floored by what I saw. I mean, he's only about 6 years older than I am. So I might have been 12 or 13 the first time I saw him fight. But the meanness, the skill set this guy had, Tyson had something to prove. And he did a hell of a job doing it. But then after retirement, he became funny. That was the thing with Mike Tyson. He became incredibly entertaining. He was just all around a very likable guy. Now, I've never met him in person, but whenever you see Tyson on TV, he was always fun to listen to because he's very good at with the self-immolation, right? The self-deprecating humor. And one thing that you really got to watch if you haven't watched it yet is Mike Tyson's Mysteries. It is the funniest friggin' cartoon you'll ever see in your life. It's done like Scooby-Doo. It's him and his Vietnamese daughter, a ghost and a pigeon that don't really solve any problems at all. And it's usually to do with the supernatural. And the pigeon is the voice of, what's his name? Norm Macdonald. Thank you, Norm Macdonald. The show is an absolute riot. And in the show, Tyson makes himself look stupid because it's funny. Now, there's an episode where he keeps running over astronauts, and he's driving along in his van, which looks like the Mystery Machine, and he hits something, go, oh, man, I killed another astronaut. And he'll call the insurance company, telling the insurance company he killed an astronaut. And the insurance company tells him never to admit it, to say that there was an astronaut who was killed, but never to say that you killed him. You guys, you got to watch it. It was written partially by Tyson, but the way that it works when with the professional writers were scripting everything, what they would do is they would let Mike Tyson, they'd have him read the script they wrote, and then they would give him the microphone and say, here, you do it. And the stuff that would come out of his mouth was funnier than the script. What I'm getting at is, in general, between Mike Tyson and Jake Paul, I prefer the human being Mike Tyson. But I did manage to get my hands on a copy of the contract about 10 minutes before the fight. I couldn't believe what I was reading. So if Mike Tyson were to knock Jake Paul out, which he was fully capable of doing, I might add, in the first 2 rounds, he wouldn't get paid. Yeah, it was something like $10,000. So the only way for him to get paid was to go the full distance of all the rounds. Now you watch, it might have been the second or third round where Tyson, they were wrestling a little bit and Paul said something in his ear. I have no clue what he said, but that's when Tyson stopped hitting him. So it was just 2 guys dancing in a ring, both of whom they made millions off of it. Good for them. But that's pretty much going to be the last Netflix live sporting event I ever watch. It was junk. So that's my opinion, everybody. It was set up specifically for the purposes of making money, but also to set up Jake Paul as the boxing bad guy. So now boxing has become WWE. Now you got the bad guy with the beard that everybody hates. I won't be watching boxing anymore. Just for the record, I'll stick with UFC. Or if I am going to watch boxing, with me living here in Panama, I can do a couple things. I can watch cockfights in town, or I can watch amateur boxing, which is incredible stuff. These guys, like, they really mean to win. So I'll just stick with the amateur stuff. Forget the pros. I couldn't care less about the pros anymore. All right. Trump was next. You're all asking me what I thought about the Trump victory. Obviously, I'm happy about it. I'm ecstatic about the fact that the left-wing crybabies out there are pulling out their hair and screaming. This Trump victory has led to a couple of things. Women are now showing us how crazy they really are, especially the left-wingers. They are shaving their heads to make themselves look ugly because men voted for Trump. Now, I'm not too sure what they're trying to achieve with that, but now they'll look like their souls, ugly as hell and non-feminine. There's another one, what's it called? Is it B4? Is that what they're calling it? Where these same ugly liberal women who have shaved their heads are now tattooing their faces and refusing to have sex with men to punish men for voting for Trump. Somebody please, on the left, if there's a liberal nut job watching this show right now, call me and explain this to me, because the logic is well over my head and gone. I don't get it. But if psychotic liberal women are shaving their heads and not having sex, guess what? There's going to be less liberalism in the gene pool. So I will say thank you, liberal ladies, for shaving your heads and swearing off sex. If you like, what I could do is send out crazy glue and needles and threads so you can, stitch and glue and just make it permanent. All right. Wouldn't that be awesome? If we could just stop having liberal-minded kids, things would just be so much better, wouldn't they? So I'm ecstatic about Trump winning, but I honestly don't think that he can fix the United States. It is way too far gone. The Democrat states are done. They have become militant war zones. They have become abandoned cities. There is no more commerce taking place in Seattle, in Portland, in Sacramento, in Los Angeles. There's no more commerce taking place in New York City. Chicago is literally, it's a demilitarized zone. It's horrible as to what's going on there. So how does Trump fix all this in 4 years? I don't think he can. What Trump is going to have to do if he really wants to fix America is he's going to have to now make sure that his son or his daughter takes over for him and they have a family legacy running the United States. Let's hope that that's going to be the case. I'm still concerned that he may not make it to his inauguration on January the 6th. That is a very deep concern of mine. You saw how much the left wing hates him. Yeah, we've had attempts on his life and they failed, but it doesn't mean that they're not going to keep trying. To which, of course, I hope the Secret Service actually do their job and protect him. And I certainly hope that Trump is putting a good $500 million into bodyguards for himself this time, because he's really going to need them. My God. Okay, everybody, we're not here to talk about Trump anymore or Tyson. We're here to talk about BRICS, and we want to get the perspective of a man who knows banking inside and out. Rob Anders, welcome back to the show. Good to see you again.
Good to be here.
All right. So for those who don't know who you are, go ahead, brag about who you are and what you've done.
Oh, well, I sat in the House of Commons for about 18 and a half years for Calgary West. Started off as a Reform MP, then Canadian Alliance, and then finally Conservative Party. And I've probably done politics for easily 10,000 hours, so I've done a fair chunk of that. Just came back from a campaign in Saskatchewan where I think we pushed the government in the right direction to protect women in terms of their change rooms and bathrooms, to not have menus, etc., and to deliver some tax cuts and stuff. So that was good. Yeah, I guess tonight's topic is the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, kind of challenge to the U.S. dollar. So what I'm going to say is I don't think it's going to work, and I'll talk about why that is and what's the point behind it. So you've obviously got Russia and China who don't like the idea that the United States is the superpower to contend with. And with Russia up to its shenanigans in Ukraine, losing, I don't know, 1,000, 2,000 guys a day, whatever, they don't like the economic freeze that's been put on them by Europe and the United States and what have you. So they're trying to find their way out from under that. And they're trying to get other nations to go around the U.S. dollar. So, I'm going to give a bit of history here because I think it helps explain things. Please. From 1945 until, let's say, 1960, the United States used to have about 20,000 tons of gold. Okay. So the deal after the Second World War basically was that the United States would be the world reserve currency, but they would do what Great Britain had done a century previous, which was to guarantee, kind of free trade and an end to piracy on the open seas. All right, fair enough. They were the only country that could do it, and they had the capacity to do it. Well, now the United States has 8,000 tons of gold, which is still the largest of any country in the world, but it's 40% of what it used to be. And they're looking at debts now that are in the tune of, tens of trillions of dollars. If you look at just the federal, it's like, 20 plus. If you take all the debts combined type of thing between various levels of government, et cetera, it's 30 trillion plus. So it's a lot of public debt and private debt too. But anyhow, there's issues there. So the way a friend of mine who's a energy trader for Royal Dutch Shell, he said, the US dollar is the cleanest shirt in the basket, right? So if you compare it to the euro, or you compare it to this BRICS scenario that Russia and China are trying to set up, it's the cleanest shirt in the basket. It's not perfect. It's not what it was in the 1960s, but it's still better than the other games in town, as it were. So, all right. The Chinese used to have about 3,000 tons of gold. They're now down around just over 2,000. The Russians claim to have about 2,000, but just between June and August, they lost another 4 tons. Okay.
Wow.
So,
really?
Yeah. Well, if you're spending billions and you're losing 2,000 soldiers a day, and you waged a war that you said was only going to take 3 days to seize Kiev, and it's 3 years in, you're losing money and you're losing bodies. So, I wouldn't be surprised if the Russian gold reserves are actually a lot less than that. Let's put it this way: if you're willing to lie about the men you're losing, then you're willing to lie about your gold reserves. In China's case, if you're willing to lie about where the Wuhan virus came from, or how it started, or whatever, gain of function, etc., whatever, and you're willing to lie about 300 million people you just kind of lost in terms of your population data, then you're willing to lie about your gold reserves, right? So, now for some of these other guys, India, for example, I sense, is actually trying to increase its gold reserves. Like, they went from 841 tons to 854 tons, so they're up 13 tons just in those 2 months. So India, I think, is realizing that there could be some currency issues, and they're looking to back up their currency with larger gold reserves. And I'm not sure if I'm India, I'm not sure I really want to be in a currency scheme with the Russians and the Chinese. The Russians and the Chinese have an uneasy situation because they both, in a sense, hunger over Kamchatka and Trans-Siberia. And then with the Indians, they have open conflicts with the Chinese over some of the various peaks they have between them in the Himalayas. So I think if I'm India, I may not be crazy about the U.S. dollar. I may think that the U.S. has high debts and less gold than it used to, and I may not buy as many U.S. Treasury bills or whatever. But I don't think I'm going to say, I'm all the way in with Russia and China on this. And then you've got this other scenario with, for example, Brazil. I think Brazil toys with this idea mostly because you had the Cubans running around the Americas, the little tail that wags the dog, with some of these left-leaning regimes, where Cuba, even though it was a smaller economy than Venezuela's, was influencing ideologically Hugo Chavez, and I
Right.
understand other regimes. So that, I think, explains maybe what the Brazilians are up to, because if I was them, I wouldn't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole either. And let's talk about South Africa. So South Africa used to have 184 tons of gold back in 2000. I would have loved to have checked the stats going back to the 60s, 70s, 80s, etc., because I suspect South Africa was doing relatively better even then in terms of its gold reserves. They had the Brezhnev doctrine, which meant that Brezhnev had this idea that the Soviets would get a warm water port on the Indian Ocean to destabilizing Afghanistan and then Pakistan, and then also destabilize the countries to the north of South Africa and eventually seize the rhodium, gold, and diamonds that are in South Africa. And the South African Communist Party and the African National Congress in tandem took over in 91, but of course there were the food riots in East Germany in 89, so the timing just didn't quite work out the way that Brezhnev and Andropov and some of those Soviet engineers, if you will, planned. But anyhow, South Africa's dropped down to 125 tons of gold. So they've literally given up 60 tons of gold just since the year 2000. So they're following the path of Canada, which effectively has no gold reserves. We're one of 5 countries. Canada's one of 5 countries that has absolutely no gold reserves, along with like Cameroon. So yeah, and you think about it, back in the 60s, we used to have like 2,500 tons when you take into account all the other countries that stored their reserves here, like the Netherlands, etc., blah, blah, blah. If we just maintained that, even if we hadn't added to it, if we just maintained it, Canada at this stage would be the 3rd largest gold holding country in the world. You believe it? And now we have 0.
I believe it because Canada does not do anything right except maple syrup and gold and silver purity. The retail gold and silver that you can buy in Canada is pretty pure stuff, and it is sought after. So something that, with me being here in Panama, for example, I can tell you that the banks here, they'll lap it up in a second. You bring Canadian gold or Canadian silver here, it's theirs. They'll take it. They'll throw cash at you like this. But Canadians, I don't think, understand just how good our gold really is, and they have no clue what you're talking about when you say that the country no longer has any gold reserves. It's frightening to think that Trudeau sold all of our gold to back our currency in any way. So maybe you could just explain to people what that means. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I used to have an office in East Block, and we had vaults in the basement of East Block that held, at that time, Canada's gold bullion reserve. And I just want to say yet again that we actually had a magical period from 1817 to 1914 where Canada was the longest standing free banking system in the world for 97 years, where if the banks, let's say the CIBC or Toronto Dominion or Bank of Nova Scotia, held enough gold or silver, they would go ahead and issue their own currency. They agreed, along with the Bank Act, formed at first 1869 and then redone again in 1871, to hold a certain reserve, a percentage, if you will, in gold or silver. And then after that, they could print their own currency. But that stuff was very respected, and it was openly used, traded, accepted, not only in Canada, but all through the Caribbean and through Great Britain, etc. So it's good stuff. And it was actually one of probably the best examples of a banking system in the world for 97 years. It was a golden time. We should be very proud of it as Canadians. But and then the reserves got larger because they hollowed out. They had the Bank of Canada that was set up, around the time of the First World War, and then they created a massive cavern underneath where the Bank of Canada is in Ottawa to store Canada's gold bullion. And at one point, we had about 2,500 tons, and now we've got nothing. And are one of the 5 countries in the world that have nothing. And so it's a travesty to think of how badly the country slipped in terms of this. When you look at the U.S., when they used to have 20,000 tons, now down to 8,000 tons, It started really to slip in the 60s, and I imagine a good chunk of that was just program spending and the Great Society and Lyndon Johnson and all that type of stuff. But also Nixon, by the time it got to the 70s, didn't want to see France and other countries repatriate the redeemability of the gold and take it back to France. So they pulled the U.S. Off the redeemability factor in 1971. And by 73, they had to figure out something to do to make sure that the U.S. was still the reserve currency, because that means that a lot of countries are going to hold your treasury bills and cash and various things and prop up. There's something to be said about being a superpower and having the world's reserve currency. There's advantage to that. So what they did was they turned it to the petrodollar. And so in 1973, they reached an agreement with Saudi Arabia where all Saudi Arabian oil would have to be purchased in US dollars. And that held true until very recently. The Saudi Arabians are sitting on over $20 trillion of their net worth, wealth, whatever you want to call it, sovereign wealth. And so, literally, the Saudi Arabians could single-handedly offset the United States federal debt if they so choose to do so, and just hold it all in U.S. Treasury bills or whatever. So you've got these countries that they just don't like the U.S. being the top dog, and so you've got the South Africas, the Russia, China, I think less so India and Brazil, because Russia just had a meeting of these guys and they couldn't get an agreement on what the currency was going to be, what it was going to look like, when it was going to happen, anything. They couldn't get any of that. And I think it's because some of these other countries have cold feet. Like, let's face it, Russia is in a war that there's no end in sight of. There's no clear understanding that they're going to come away a winner in this in any way, shape, or form. Matter of fact, I mean, the Russians have lost a huge amount of people and materiel. And with Ukraine now having the ability to use the ATACMS systems and do longer range missile hits inside Russia, I think it's only going to turn worse for the Russians. So I can't blame anybody for not wanting to back that type of challenge to the US dollar. So that's all bad news for BRICS. There's the odd person I run into who says that they don't like the way the U.S. has sold off gold, and they don't like the way the U.S. has piled on debt, and et cetera, and they don't like some of the big spending, and that's all fine. Like, I get that, right? But it doesn't mean that it's smart to abandon the U.S. dollar and go for the BRICS situation, right? Because I think that's just incredibly more unstable. I also I just want to add this in because I've talked about this on previous shows. I also think that the euro is not something to be long with us. I think Margaret Thatcher was right back in the 1980s when she said that the European common market made sense to her because the Czechs could sell their crystal more cheaply without tariffs put on it by other countries, as the Germans could sell their manufactured goods or steel, as the British could sell their cod, etc. And so it increased the purchasing power of people in the respective countries in the European Union and globally to purchase European goods. That makes sense. But the stuff about losing border controls, about losing immigration controls, losing control over the labor market in a sense, and then also this idea that you're going to have 20 plus countries with different savings rates, productivity, taxation, etc. All these different variables, 20-some variables in the macroeconomic formula across 20-some countries. You're talking 400 to 500 variables across the whole thing to figure out the value of the euro. I mean, and then you've got Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain that are indebted, and you've got Germany and Britain holding the bag on this, and you got Britain now with Brexit looking to get out, the Germans voting in the AfD, Alternative for Deutschland, in the German Bundestag because they don't want to pay these bills. So, the bankers in London and Frankfurt are basically saying, well, we don't want to be hold the bag on this. The taxpayers are voting against it. So I think the U.S. dollar is still, like I say, as my buddy said, the cleanest dirty shirt in the basket. But I do predict that at some stage the euro is going to take a bit of a hit because I just don't think this policy makes much sense when you've got some countries that are just massively indebted and other countries that are paying the bills, and electorates in those countries that are paying the bills are starting to vote more and more for parties that don't want to pay the bills and hold the bag anymore. So, it's going to be interesting times in terms of where this goes currency-wise. Canada, the only thing we've really got going for us is that we do about 60% of our trade. When Mulroney did the free trade agreement, it was about 80% of our trade was with the United States. Now we've diversified a little bit with various free trade agreements, et cetera. So we're down to about 60% of our trade that we do with the United States, but that's still, a massive chunk. And so that's the biggest thing we have going for us. And obviously the election of Trump means hopefully less spending, more fiscally responsible policies. It breathes a little more life into the US dollar. I think, you and I discussed previous to this that had Trump not won, I think that would have helped out the BRICS situation, right? Even
Trump, yeah, I agree with that, Rob. So I'll say this: like, had Trump not won, BRICS would be full fledged. I'm here in Panama. I've been in Panama now for 7 months, and the Panamanians, I can tell you, they know what BRICS is, and they were fully expecting it to happen if Biden or Harris, whatever, won the election. Now, here's what they all perceive it to be, and I'm telling you, like, Panama they're way ahead of Canada in everything, in business and just in general nationalism and thinking, which is wonderful. They're talking about the fact that BRICS would probably not have printed bills and would all be a digital currency and would either just be the XRP cryptocurrency or be tethered directly to the XRP currency. Now, where they're used to that idea here in Panama, because the here we go. Here, the Balboa, the $1 coin. That's the $1 coin, everybody. Kind of looks like the Canadian $2 coin. All right. There's the Balboa, and there is the bigger one, the Cinquente, which is the 50-cent piece. And they also mint their own quarters. That's what they do. They only mint those 3 coins. They don't mint paper money because the currency in Panama is tethered directly to the US dollar. So I think now that Trump is in office, everybody here in Panama is excited because the US dollar will remain as the currency, because it is the currency. You just take out US cash, you get whatever you want down here. So I'm happy about this. My concern is that Trump may not make it to inauguration. There might be another attempt on his life, which would suck. If Trump does not make it to the inauguration on January the 6th, I do feel that the US dollar will begin its descent. Not begin, it'll just finish, probably within a year. And then BRICS will become not only competition, but necessary competition. Let's get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I saw an interview that General Flynn did with Steve Bannon, where he said basically the next 3 months were crucial to keep Trump alive. And he suggested making sure that he basically has almost like a compound, a bunker mentality down at Mar-a-Lago, and to bring in people from Fort Bragg that are vested in and true patriots that want to see him alive and drain the swamp, get the problems fixed, to make sure that he makes it to then. Because as Flynn and Bannon said, I mean, it's not as though he didn't have a couple attempts on his life and that there weren't people actively trying to snuff him out. So, I think his reelection is key to be able to fix some of the problems. Now, there's a lot of problems to fix, as you rightfully point out, and it's daunting. And the question always is, I remember Preston Manning gave a speech in Parliament when he left, and he said, you go to Ottawa wanting to change this much. You leave Ottawa having changed this much. But this much is more than most people will ever do. And so will Trump get it all done? I don't know. But I will say this, when I helped and campaigned for him in 2016, had he just taken a good stab at ISIS, I would have said, okay. Had he just reversed Obama's executive orders to restrict buying ammunition, I would have said, that's good. Had he just brought in some tax reforms and cuts, I would have said, that's good enough for me. Had he just secured the U.S. southern border against the cartels, even just built more wall, I would have said, that's good enough for me. But it turns out he started checking the boxes on every single one of them. So I think he certainly came into office in his first go in 2016 with a wish list of things that he wanted to get done, and was trying nobly on a number of fronts. Congress, blocking his efforts a lot of times on the border wall security stuff. But I think now he comes in far more understanding of the swamp and what he's up against, and much more suspicious of subversives inside the FBI and other security apparatuses and whatever. So I think he comes in even with a greater sense of purpose now, and especially after his life being saved by just millimeters, in Pennsylvania. I think he comes in with a renewed focus. And Bannon too, having gone to jail. I mean, I remember when he came out talking, directly down the camera lens to Pelosi and others, saying, like, you've done your worst. You stuck me in jail. You treated me like garbage. Now it's my time, and now the hunted will become the hunters. So I hope they are able to fix a lot of it, and I don't know how far they're going to go and how much they're going to get done, but I wish them the best.
Absolutely. Now we got to cover the Canadian election coming up, the federal election coming up in November of next year. First off, I got to remind Canadians this, and for those who are watching on Kick and on TikTok who cannot see my special guest tonight is Rob Anders. He is a former member of Parliament in Canada. He was so for 18 years, and he is a banking expert. He's also a very good historian when it comes to banking and currency. And Rob was kind enough when I was running for mayor of Calgary to bring me into his lovely home and give me some instructions on the best way to be suave and debonair. I mean, it was a great lesson that I got. So if anybody knows anything about Canadian politics, it most certainly is going to be Rob Anders, having served for 18 years and been this close to jihadi Justin Trudeau. So Canadians now, with this BRICS thing, they don't understand it. They really don't. Canadians do not understand economics in any particular way. In fact, here's the best description I've ever heard about Canada and Canadians. This was by an India professor stating that Canadians are chickens, literally scratching with their claws in the dirt to find small things to sell to the Americans. Canada does not innovate. We don't create. We don't bring the best minds in. And whenever we do produce something, we don't sell it to the world. We just pray to God that America buys it, and then pray to any other gods in the universe that the Americans pay the bill, which doesn't always happen. So Canadians really, they're children in the world. And I can tell you, Rob, after having been in Panama now this year, holy smoke, everybody here is hustling. Everybody here is making money. There's money everywhere. We got 52 banks here, all making money. We've got a mall here that's 1.1 kilometers long, and it's making money. And there are 3 other massive malls all making money. There are 3 airports in Panama City all making money. The canal is full, making money. And the Panamanians are out there just dying to get their hands on more. Like there's a hunger around the world for riches. And Canadians don't have that hunger at all. But they do have faith that Stephen Harper, no, I'm sorry, not Harper, Pierre Poilievre, my mistake, running for prime minister, who may win, he's going to save us. He's going to save the country of Canada. Everything's going to turn around the day he takes office. My thoughts, not a chance in hell is that going to happen. Canada's a population of 40 million, 11 million of which are unemployed. There's been almost 11 million of them brought in since 1994 from non-white, non-traditional countries who have no skills and get free welfare. So with a $1.4 to $1.6 trillion debt, what exactly could one man do to fix that? And my last thought on Pierre Poilievre, this digital identification crap, this was his idea. So because he wants Canadians to have digital ID, what he does is he comes out and he's talking about a company that's not even a Canadian company, Pornhub.com. He says Pornhub.com is a problem with everybody's household, and we're going to solve the problem by making everybody who wants to go to Pornhub.com have digital identification online so that the website can confirm who you are. Now, what in the hell does a private company have to do with Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative Party of Canada, Canada in general. So the guy's a farce. He's already proved himself to be a farce. But you're the former politician of 18 years. Let's get your take on what I just said, please.
Well, Canada's got massive problems, obviously. You're right in terms of saying, like, I worry about the election just in and of itself, because I think there's so many things that corrupt and subvert the electoral process. I remember when Eric Lowther, a colleague of mine, was the MP in Calgary Centre, when he lost to Joe Clark, there were 10,000 ballots that were cast by statutory declaration. You say, what is that, Rob? Well, it's vouching. It means that somebody walks into a polling location, says, oh, I forgot my wallet. I don't have any ID. Is it okay if I vote? And they go, well, sure. What's your name? Elmer Fudd. Oh, well, Elmer, are you willing to sign that your name is Elmer? Absolutely. And is anybody else willing to vouch that you're Elmer Fudd? Well, yeah, the guy who drove the bus for Daffy Duck and Mickey Mouse and the rest of us, yeah, he'll vouch for us. Okay, and then the whole bus votes. No joke. And then they go on to the next advanced polling location, and the whole bus votes again, right? And this is written up. You can look this stuff up. This was actually documented. There was a liberal organizer who was caught red-handed doing it and admitted it. So that's just statutory declarations. Then you've got the electronic tabulators, right? We've had electronic tabulators used in every single Conservative leadership race since Harper, every single Liberal thing since Justin Trudeau, now being used in the general elections in New Brunswick. You've got mail-in ballots, which just really started to flood in because of the COVID situation for the 2020 and the U.S. election, as well the Canadian elections and stuff like that. And you've also got tons of advanced polling situations where you break the chain of custody, and you don't have a clear track, of where the ballots are going or who's holding them and what the story is. So I think we have to move as much as possible back to the old style of voting, where you go in on the day of, you cast the ballot, it gets counted that same day. None of this BS about it's going to, come in if it's post dated, before a certain date, etc. Why would you want to have that many tens of thousands or God knows how many ballots floating around, without being counted and spoken for by election? It's ridiculous. Look at how long it took BC to figure out what was going on there. So no, okay, that's one thing, just the election itself, the mechanism alone, and that needs to be fixed not just federally but also provincially here in Alberta and BC and across the country. Okay, mass immigration. Let's face it. I remember giving a speech in Montreal after I first became a Reform Member of Parliament, and there were a lot of young new immigrants in the audience. I was speaking at McGill University, and one of the things I said was that, when you're looking to get into Canada to get a citizenship, and it could be the United States, it could be any number of these, more developed, economic systems. People want to get in, okay, but once you're accepted, now you're part of the family. Now you have to start thinking about, who do we want to have as part of this? I mean, do you want lots of people with no or zero skill sets coming in? Do you want people that have, lots of, disease or medical conditions or whatever, they're going to cost your healthcare system a tremendous amount of money? Do you want a bunch of retirees that are going to go ahead and strip your pensions out, et cetera, without having contributed for a lifelong, work, contributing? There's all these factors, right? And if you allow that system to be abused, I remember Howard Phillips with the U.S. Taxpayers Party one time down at the Council for National Policy in Washington made a great point, and he said this: if you attract immigrants based on their opportunity to make a living and to do well for themselves, etc., and to have lower taxes and to produce, that's one thing. That's kind of been more of the American model. Mm-hmm. If, on the other hand, you say, oh, we're a welfare state, cradle to grave, social programs, come here and you're going to get free health care and you're going to get a roof over your head and you're going to get university education subsidized by everybody else, and well, then you're attracting a different type of person. Then you're basically saying, come here and look at all these goodies that the long, old stock Canadians are going to pay for and subsidize, right? And that's a whole different situation, and you're going to attract different people, and the costs are going to be much higher. So that's a problem that needs to be dealt with, and that's something that I applaud Maxime Bernier for having touched on some of these issues, because it does need to be addressed, and we'll see where Pierre goes with it. I hope he has courage on these issues. The debt. I remember when I first got elected in the 1990s, the debt was around $600 billion. I remember thinking to myself, I wonder if in my time as a parliamentarian or in my lifetime, whether or not we'll cross $1 trillion. Well, Justin Trudeau just added $1 trillion all by himself. And certainly his old man, Pierre, was bueno bad, in terms of racking up the debt. So between the two Trudeaus, I'm not sure we'd have much of a debt. I mean, those two cats, between the two of them, have added, they probably 70% of the debt is between the two Trudeaus, really. I mean, it's disgusting. So that's a tough one, right? Because...
Yeah, and you know what, Rob, I don't mean to cut you off there, but when there was surveys that were done about who voted for Trudeau and why, and it was incredible how many women said, I voted for him because he's good looking or he has nice hair. It's not like they looked at any of the policies he was bringing forward. And he admitted before he even got elected that his plan was to turn Canada into a woke. He called it a paradise. I call it hell on earth. And I think all of you are finally catching on to that. So we do have a problem where we're just not, people in general are not paying attention. Now that's the United States as well, is too many Americans and too many Canadians and too many Brits are so eager to jump on board with the left-wing bandwagon. Now that's starting to taper off a little bit, but for the last 8 to 10 years, we've had the left wing thinking communistic, just like Kamala Harris, just like Joe Biden, just like Barack Obama, just like Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland. And the end result is fentanyl use is at an all-time high. Heroin use, all-time high. Overdoses from all of the above, all-time high. Gun crime, theft, rape, all-time high. Why? Lack of economy, no jobs whatsoever for locals. We have complete discrimination against white people. You can't get a job if you're white. I went through that for 20 years in Canada. And then this unfettered immigration thing, where we're putting immigrants, illegal aliens who are excessively violent and completely uneducated, that have no purpose on this planet, are staying in luxury hotels. And white Americans and white Canadians and white Brits are paying for them to do this. So now what? Is there actually a solution, aside from mass deportation? Is there a solution to any of this that you can see? Please go ahead.
Sure. Well, and by the way, I applaud Trump on that, and the guy who's going to be looking after that forum, to say, that basically people who have come illegally have got to go. I remember I was down in Tucson, Arizona in 2016 when Trump won, and I could realize he was winning when he was picking up both the Carolinas, particularly North Carolina, that night. But there were a lot of Latinos in that audience that were supporting Trump in 2016. And these were people who had come into the United States legally. And they did not like the idea that other people were jumping the queue and coming in illegally and being given their tax dollars, to abuse the system. So I think, deportations is a way to go. Eisenhower dealt with that in the 1950s. What they dealt with is they had a lot of people coming into the United States for economic opportunity, which of course has been the case for a long time. And what Eisenhower did was he said, okay, well, if you're found working illegally in the United States, we're going to deem that whatever you've got as assets were garnered illegally because it was all from illegal work, illegal pay, etc. So they would seize the assets and then deport them. So then all of a sudden you have these people, largely from Latin America, who had to make a decision. Do I leave with what I have now and take it out and export it, go back to wherever? Or do I wait until I'm caught and then I get everything taken, I lose it all and get sent back? And so that actually facilitated a lot of people going back and trying to come in through legal means, etc. So that was something that Eisenhower did in the 1950s, which I think is an intelligent policy about this as well. The other thing I wanted to touch on is Milei in Argentina. I think a lot of governments in the world would do well by following that type of example, because we have all sorts of corruption in the Canadian bureaucracy. Like, even if say, for example, we look at this Arrive Can app, okay, this stuff is
yeah,
it's ridiculous. Like, it was hundreds of times over budget, right? That doesn't happen by accident. You've got people who are obviously corrupt bureaucrats inside the system who are allowing this to go on. I mean, I've come across some stuff in the last little bit where this new iteration of it is going to allow drug cartels to figure out who's going across the border and when, where, what they're going to be traveling in. And so these people will be made to be unwitting mules for drug trafficking. Right? And the thing is, there were actually systems in place by private sector companies years before this, but the government said they didn't want to pick winners and go ahead and test these things, even though U.S. Homeland Security and various other entities said that this stuff had tremendous merit. It was going to use a spectrometer to measure parts per trillion on sea cans coming into Canada's ports. Right now, we only test about 5%. This was going to test about 95% of the cargo that comes in, and it would have been able to test for drugs, it would have been able to test for explosives, and it would have been able to test for human cargo. So we could have curtailed a huge amount of this. But right. China took an interest in it because that would mean less human smuggling and less fentanyl and less opium coming in. And so they pretended as though they were interested in buying this company, got all their prospectus, figured it out, and then used the Canada Revenue Agency to shut down this enterprise, which could have done all these things years ago, and it would have been financed privately and all that. It's just like the corruption. So anyhow, Milei is right. As soon as you start stripping back some of these departments, you find a lot of this stuff is done to cover payola and kickback and bribery and feather bedding and all this type of stuff. So the more you shrink the size of government, the easier it is to find the corruption and the waste and what goes on to inflate people's bank accounts, right? Etc.
Yeah, well, look at what Milei did when he became the leader of Argentina. He goes on stage and he's yelling at, I guess, the state broadcaster, telling the state broadcaster that all you left-wing people are shit. He kept saying it. That's the exact word he was using. And that he was going to stop it dead. And within a week, he'd fired 20,000 politicians and 20,000 people working for the government. And thank God for that. All of a sudden, Argentina is making money. Elon Musk takes over Twitter, rebrands it X. He fires between 15 and 20,000 people there. And he says, it's amazing. I'm down to less than 280 people working for the company. And when you don't have left-wing crybabies censoring everything, you just don't need these people around. Yeah, and I'm still hoping that Trump, when he does take office, sends out the cavalry to go pick up Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey for election interference in the previous election, because social media, there's been some court rulings on it that were just seemingly ignored in the United States, and that was that social media had become a public square, much the same as City Hall or any town hall or town square. Facebook and Twitter and whatnot have become exactly that. Yet they were still allowed to use it to manipulate the election to get Biden into office. So here's hoping that that's what they do. And for our American friends who are watching this, who maybe don't know who we are, my name is Kevin J. Johnston. I have the biggest mouth in Canada. The Canadian government does not like the fact that I podcast and tell the truth about the way my country works. I'm the one that exposed Justin Trudeau's man-on-man orgy, and the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, broke my ribs for doing so. I've also spent 7 months of my life in prison in Canada for telling the truth about how Canada functions. That's it. And every single criminal charge that they laid on me, which was 75 of them, they dropped. 22 arrests, 7 months in solitary confinement, 75 charges, all dropped. And Rob, you were also a victim of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. All those books behind you on the shelf were thrown on the ground because they were looking for nothing, right?
Yeah, I have a few thousand books in my house, and literally when the CRA agents came, there were 22 of them. They came into my house, and I'm not joking. Every single book they turned upside down, flipped the pages. I don't know, were they thinking they were going to find gold ingots or something? Like, it was ridiculous. They laid 7 charges against me. Everything thrown out of court. Everything stayed. It's cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they've got more money than they could have ever, dreamt of wanting to get out of me. And I have to take them to tax court now to get some of it back. And we're doing access to information requests so that they have to show the political linkages in Ottawa, because the person who did the first audit said to his masters in Ottawa there was nothing criminal, and yet they still carried on with it. It's now 10 years in. And so we're looking to find those linkages. They don't want to do that, though. My case, the tax court was supposed to be decided this month. They're pressing it into next year because they don't want to release the access to information stuff showing the collusion from Ottawa.
Well, I know this because you can see here, I work with Americans clearing up IRS debt, and I work with Canadians clearing up Canada Revenue Agency debt. And what I can tell you is I'm beating them in court all the time now, because whenever we do take the CRA to tax court, we demand full disclosure, and they don't give anything to us, literally nothing. So how is it you can build a case against my client and then just not have any disclosure? So it's all getting thrown out the door, which is wonderful news. I'm pretty sure you're going to win your case as well. And again, for my American friends who are watching, I just want to give you an idea. Everything that was done to Donald Trump was actually done to me first. This is me running my campaign for mayor of Calgary. And I had 11 such rallies like this where the cops had to shut half the city down for us to march through town. And with having 11 events like this, the Canadian Election Board said I only got 1,700 votes. I made the front page of every newspaper in Canada for 8 straight months as the racist candidate, the Trump of the North. And I got 1,700 votes. Come on. What's going on worldwide here? I mean, are the Rothschilds really that powerful? Is that what's happening here? Or is there some other reason why I would have done so poorly? And another reason why Trump would have lost that last election? Please, Rob, tell us.
Well, there's our election systems have been seriously subverted. And I think that COVID was part of that whole thing to inject a bunch of mail-in ballots. Like Dinesh D'Souza, to his credit, did that whole documentary about the mules that the Democrats used in the U.S., where they had people harvesting ballots. So the way this goes, folks, is let's say, for example, there's an apartment building, okay, and everybody in the apartment gets sent a application or just a mail-in ballot, and then somebody goes along. A bunch of people don't want them, throw them, into the recycle bin, etc. Somebody goes along, collects those, and then fraudulently fills in those ballots, and then goes to post office boxes and dumps them off in the hundreds or thousands. Okay, that's how this stuff goes. So as soon as you start opening up with saying we don't need to have ID, and we're kicking it open to mail-in ballots. Like I had a former roommate here who was from California. I'm just outside of Calgary in Rockyville, Alberta. I still to this day get mail-in ballots sent to me continuously by the state of California. Okay, this guy hasn't lived here in years, but the state of California still sends mail-in ballots. Now you think that's California sending ballots to Alberta, right? If you allow this type of stuff, even within the city of Calgary, like in your case for mayor or whatever, it's a joke, folks. You can't allow for this mail-in ballot stuff, the electronic tabulations. It's all for the birds. It all opens up tremendous opportunities for cheating, and it's done. There's all sorts of case studies and whatever you can read about this. We have to end that stuff.
We do. And let me tell you something. I used to be a print broker. So this is before all these companies came out where they'll sell you 5,000 business cards for $20. It used to be the kind of thing where I would buy what's called a press sheet. So it was 4 foot by 6 foot, the size of a hockey net. And I would lay out hundreds of business card designs on them, and they would print them, and I would sell them and make a huge profit on that because I'd pay about $1,500 to get that press sheet made and then sell business cards, sets them for $150. I used to do really well with that, but that's the early 2000s. The reason I bring that up is because it is incredibly easy with printing technology. You've got these massive Heidelberg printing presses that are 70 feet long that can print in full color, and they can print 500,000 flyers, and they can do it in an hour. and they don't even need human interaction anymore. I've seen these things; they're incredible. So it's incredibly easy. If I can print business cards in an hour, believe me, these Heidelberg presses can print any ballots and make them look as official as you want to. Forgery has become an incredibly easy thing. And you've got guys on websites like Fiverr.com saying, I'll forge documents for you for $5. So yeah, it's real easy to rig elections when you're utilizing mail-in ballots or digital ballots. And what you just said there is you've got a former California candidate and you're getting ballots mailed to you in a different time zone and a different country still to this day.
Mm-hmm.
My God, America, you got to pull up your socks. You got to stop this.
Yeah. And I also wanted to go back to something you were talking about before about a digital ID. And I just want to point out to folks that digital ID and central bank digital currency, all this stuff is intertwined. And if I could tell you 1,000 different things about it. And as Kevin knows, I send out, emails about latest developments and what I think is going on in various places, whether it's Zimbabwe or Nigeria or whatever about this. All you got to do is look at China. If you look at China and the digital yuan, that tells you everything you need to know. Where this stuff is going, whether it's a digital ID or it's a central bank digital currency, is the control that China has on their citizenry. So if you criticize the government in Facebook, Google, whatever it is, okay, all of a sudden you can't buy a plane ticket, a train ticket, a bus ticket. You can't apply for a government job. If you are wanting to pay your tax bills, you have to do it in digital yuan, type of thing. Just all the restrictions, they can have it expire on you and say, well, Kevin, if you don't spend it in 3 months because we want to stimulate the economy, your million yuan are just going to disappear. They won't exist anymore. Or they can tell you what to spend it on. Like instead of, we don't like the fact you want to buy a gas guzzler, Kevin, you got to buy an electric vehicle, from this, blah, blah, blah. The amount of control this stuff lends is just disgusting. And I worry about that stuff. Like I don't want Big Brother, right? George Orwell wrote about this and he understood very well what it was all about. And we have to avoid that stuff.
Yeah, we most certainly do. The whole this whole thing about being on camera all the time. I know that all of us are used to the idea that we're going to be on camera somewhere with cell phones. Every small business has a camera pointing somewhere, probably on the sidewalk. Most homes now have cameras pointing outward. So if you're going to commit a crime, you got to do crazy things now. And don't commit crimes. I'm not encouraging. I'm just saying you'd have to leave the area that you're in, change your clothes, come back in, commit the crime, walk back out, change your clothes, and then walk so that someone's camera sees your alibi. Yeah, it is wild. Now, these are just $200 and $300 camera systems you can buy at Costco or Walmart that are they always have us on camera. Now, imagine what governments have with the amount of unlimited budget that they've got. And I think at this point, it's really easy for them to collect the data. But I got to say this, thank God for diversity hires in North America, because they are absolutely incompetent. So even though all this data is being collected on us, the stupid people that are working for these departments don't know what to do with it. And a prime example that I can give you, the Canada Revenue Agency, as you pointed out, there are more people working for the Canada Revenue Agency than the Canadian military right now, but 30,000 of them are diversity hires from god-awful countries, and they've got incredibly low intelligence quotients. So the government is, by way of these left-wing policies, weakening themselves to the point where they really can't enforce much. So now you, as the 18-year career politician, how do we get ourselves away from this matrix? There's all these cameras, these digital IDs. Let's hear it.
Well, one of the things is when you can use cash, right? Because it keeps it alive. Because otherwise, if banks think, 99% of people and 99% of transactions use some form of digital, whether it's a credit card or it's a debit card or whatever, get out of that habit. Go back to cash, because that's the way you're going to keep it, And in terms of, there was a great scene out of Yes Minister, which was Margaret Thatcher's favorite show. And they talked about creating this big database, and this was back in probably the 80s, that this was early 80s, I'm thinking the show was on. And it was talking about this big database, this big brother they wanted to create type of thing for tracking everybody so that, things, didn't, they wanted to try to streamline, as it were, and not have people double bill systems and all that type of stuff. But so people say security, right? Security. Oh, we need security. But if you go too far with that, then it means the government tracks everything, right? Like if you have a central bank digital currency, people don't understand. I don't think, like, that means there's no cash anymore. There's no loose change. Any condom that people want to buy, any birth control test that people want to buy, any pornography, any drugs, any whatever. Now, I'm not much of a connoisseur of any of these various things, but I just want to say that people have to understand that when you go to a central bank digital currency, you lose all manner of privacy, right? So right now, for example, if I was to go out and buy gasoline using my bank card with an Alberta regulated financial institution, okay, that institution knows if I'm buying a burger at Wendy's, or knows if I'm buying gasoline or a book, at Valley Village or whatever. But if all of a sudden it's a central bank digital thing, first off, they don't really need retail banks anymore. Okay. And that's what Gazbank in the Soviet Union was. They nationalized the banks in 1917 under Lenin, got rid of them. The government was now in charge of credit. And think how disastrous that is. Okay. But then they're the ones who track everything. So they have now this digital ability that Lenin didn't have in 1917. And so every single thing that you do now, if Mr. Trudeau or any of his minions decide that they don't like how much ammunition you're buying, or how much gasoline you're buying, or how much gasoline your truck burns, or whatever it is, or how far you're traveling, in a given day because you're not living up to their 15-minute city ideal or whatever. Okay, all of a sudden you can't get gasoline, you can't get ammunition, you can't do this, you can't do this. It's a very powerful mechanism, and we shouldn't give them this much power. You don't want that. That's, just look at what China is today. You've got people in China that will spend millions of dollars on a home in Vancouver that they don't even live in, that sprouts weeds, because they would rather have the money in that than in a bank or a digital yuan or whatever in China. And banks are crashing in China right now. They're having some economic difficulties. Okay. And they'd rather have it in Vancouver sprouting weeds than they would having it in China, where the government can control it, expire it, and seize it, tax it. Like, in my case, for example, or in your case, Kevin, if the government says, we think you owe this amount of money. Now, I've had 7 of those charges thrown out, and I'm challenging them in tax court. But if you have a central bank digital currency, they just take it right out of whatever they want to. There's no check. There's no ability to argue against them. They just seize it, right? And they have the power to do so. So no, it's a terrible situation. You don't want to go down that road.
Well, the other thing is you have to pay attention to what the major manufacturers are doing in North America, everybody. And that was Ford had stated that they were willing, they didn't say they would, but willing to participate in an experiment in Western Canada with their Ford trucks. And that is, if you were speeding, the Ford truck would report to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police that you're speeding, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police would send you a ticket in the mail. That is absolutely terrifying. So you really now got to start paying attention to the end user agreement of every single thing that you purchase. Now, solution, buy cars out of the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, the 60s. Buy cars, go to Mexico and buy, they still make Volkswagen Beetles, the old ones. Buy some of those and bring them to Canada. You can't have GPS units. You can't even have computers in your cars anymore. It's frightening to think of what all that is. Maybe for summertime, get yourself an old Suzuki motorcycle, like, the A150s they used to have, or the 250s, because they don't have anything on them except for a battery and a light and an engine. You cannot have computers tracking you any longer. Or you could leave Canada, United States, United Kingdom, France, and you can come to places like South Mexico, Belize, Panama, Argentina, because they simply don't have the infrastructure to put all those cameras in. And I'll tell you this, the Panamanians would never put up with it. The Panamanians would shut the country down with protests for weeks until they rip all those cameras down. So different cultures do things differently. And I do appreciate the fact that Panamanians will stand up for what their rights are.
Oh, for sure. And I think I've mentioned this before, but I just want to reiterate this. I sat on a transportation committee when I was early on in my parliamentary career, and Reg Alcock was the chair of that back when he was the member for Liberal member in Winnipeg. And he was very excited about intelligent transportation systems. And so we got death by PowerPoint, as the military would call it, where we just got all this stuff about, lights and measuring traffic at lights and, rush hour and, greens and reds and yellows, and how it was going to streamline traffic flow and control traffic and manipulate traffic and all this type of stuff and monitor the cars and, blah, blah. And I thought to myself at the time, I was an MP in my 20s at the time, I thought to myself, well, who the hell wants all these cameras, and what expense is this going to be, and what's the point of this? And now I realize it wasn't just going to do it in macro, okay? This was going to do it in micro, so it could track your individual license plate and your speed and all this type of stuff for the issuing of traffic tickets, et cetera, et cetera. So it wasn't a macro mechanism necessarily to go ahead and make traffic congestion, rush hour more streamlined. It actually would be used to micromanage you and your activities, right? That's evil stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess, by show of hands, who wants somebody who works for the government to know anything about you? And what I would encourage all of you out there to understand is that you have the right to remain silent in Canada and in the United States. And I would like all of you to start exercising that right. Stop talking about your lives. Rob, it's incredible. Somebody passes away in someone's family and people will say, oh, my dad just died, on 20 social media platforms. And then they have no idea why the Canada Revenue Agency or the IRS is sending them letters saying, oh, your dad's dead, give us money because we've assessed his taxes. Stop. Talk. And that's just social media without an automatic algorithm saying, send it in. But they're looking around and they'll see these things on their own and they'll penalize you for it. Go ahead, Rob, sir.
I have to give the Israelis credit. They told their citizens quite some time ago to avoid the use of Facebook and some of these other social media tracking things because they knew that it would be used by Israel's adversaries with regard to terrorism activities. And I have to, and I remember some of the intelligence communities that were interviewed in the U.S. Congress about how social media has facilitated their search abilities. And they just responded point blank by saying, we couldn't have imagined how easy it was going to be to track people. We used to do, stuff using human intel, et cetera. They said, but now with social media, it's just become exponentially easier to build psychological profiles and figure out what makes people tick. So I give the Israelis credit for warning their citizens about that.
Yes. Well, I can tell you, everybody in Canada, because as a big mouth podcaster in Canada, and I can tell you that Canadian culture is wrapped around not liking loud things. So for my American friends watching, yeah, Canadians are pretty boring people. They love it really quiet and they love it really boring. So whenever I was lipping off about anything to do with the Canadian government or lipping off about Biden or Barack Obama and otherwise, yes, Canada's spy agency, CSIS, known as CSIS, they were literally building a psychological profile. I've got it. I have the full disclosure. It's 4 inches thick. I brought it with me, Rob, here to Panama so that I could show the Panamanian government here how crazy Canada is. And the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, they watch this show. They transcribe everything I say. But when I read my own psychological profile, it was listed that they can't figure me out. So maybe let's help the RCMP out here a little bit. Hey, guys, it's not that you can't figure me out because I'm complicated. It's that I just don't care about any of your stupid policies. I don't care about you. I don't care about the government. I don't care about government employees. There you go. Do what you will with that information. What now? I don't care about you guys.
I'm thinking of Mel Gibson and his William Wallace character, where he just sounds freedom. Yeah. That's what it's all about, baby. I just want a small, tiny government. I'm kind of a Wyoming Republican. Okay. I just want government small. I don't need a big arena. I don't need massive government infrastructure. I just want a small government so the right hand and the left hand knows what each other is doing, and I know where the problems are. And it's small and intimate. That's all I need. I know there's some people who like big, massive government, but always remember that big, massive government that's cradle to grave can take everything from you too. And Wyoming, I think, has it right. Out of all the lower 48 states, it has the lowest combination of value-added tax, sales tax, and income tax. Beautiful.
That is fantastic. And yes, I am a victim, like you, of having property stolen by the Canadian government. They took my car. They left me in the middle of the highway, in the middle of nowhere. They took my house and they drained all my bank accounts on me and told me that I should just consider shutting up. That's essentially what they told me. So, well, thank you for the advice. I'll consider it. And I considered it. And I said, no, I ignored it. But, I had to, as a Canadian citizen, I had to escape Canada just to be able to even have a job. The Canadian government would not even let me have a job. They said that's it. You're not going to work. You're going to be on welfare and you're going to sit and shut up. So for 2 years, I'm sitting around doing nothing with my time, making $900 a month on welfare. Then I say, you know what? I've had enough. I'm out. I'm done. I'm burned out. I come to Panama and I make $300,000 in 7 months. And I'm just getting started. So you got to consider, everybody out there, is that Canada as a country, it's over. It's done. There's never going to be an economy again. You've got Argentina, Panama, Costa Rica, kind of, parts of Mexico, definitely Grenada. These countries are wanting to be G20 countries. So the opportunities in these places are remarkable. And it's incredibly easy to do business here. If you want a permit to build a 2,000 foot tall building, 20, 40, 60, 80, here's $20,000. Thank you. You got a permit. And all of a sudden, infrastructure gets built. That's how fast things happen when corruption, as we call it, is out in the open. But it's out in the open and it's affordable corruption. And it's bent around creating jobs for its own people. So funny enough, I like the corruption in Panama because every time a politician gets greased, Panamanians get jobs instantly. Whereas in Canada, politicians get greased and about 40 or 50,000 people lose their jobs. It's ridiculous. So pick your poison, as they say. I've picked mine. I'm staying here. Cheers.
Yeah, no, Canada has been overgoverned for quite some time. I think, when we had our conservative majority government, we were able to get taxes to just about the point they were under Lester Pearson. And I'm so much a believer that we need to go, we need to slash taxes. We really, really do. A friend of mine that I worked with on a campaign for a senator down in Oklahoma, he said to me, and I've heard others say this as well, but if 10% is good enough for God, it's good enough for government, right? In the old world, in the ancient world, when Rome defeated Carthage, it imposed the heaviest level of taxation in the ancient world, thinking there's no way that Carthage could rise back from that. They salted the earth and they gave it a 10% rate of taxation. We need to go back to the idea that if a tithe is good enough for God and for your church, etc., that government should not be any bigger than that. It doesn't deserve any more or any more control than that. It needs to be less.
Yeah, and Carthage could be a whole lesson. That was an incredible tale in history. Rob, I got to share with everybody something here for, again, our American friends who are watching us for the first time. As the Canada Bank Act was slated to expire on June 30th of next year, which meant that there was probably not going to be a federally chartered currency, which also meant the Canadian dollar could possibly have folded to be replaced with a central bank digital currency. And then you and I did 5 episodes in a row talking about that exact thing. And I was telling Canadians, do a bank run. Do a bank run. Get your money out of the bank, do a run. Convert it to gold and silver. And what happens is they extended it by 2 years thanks to you and I. So I want to say thank you for all the insight. In Canada, you're welcome. But now I got to talk about this. Even though, Rob, you and I have bought Canadians 2 extra years of having a bank act, should Canadians trust that the Canadian dollar is still going to be around in 2.5 years? Or should they move elsewhere? Go ahead.
Well, here's a nightmare scenario. I mean, as bad as Trudeau is, and he's bad, if Mark Carney is the heir apparent inside the Liberal Party, he is every bit the globalist that Justin Trudeau is, and he's smarter, and he'll be a better salesperson for a central bank digital currency. That would be worse than Justin Trudeau. It's hard to imagine the party getting worse than it is under Justin Trudeau, but Mark Carney would be worse. He'd have a bit of a honeymoon because he wouldn't have had of all the baggage and legacy that Justin Trudeau has had. So he gets that dead cat bounce, as they talk about after a convention, after a primary in the US. And he's smarter. And like I say, he'd be a more effective salesperson for the World Economic Forum and the Davos and the globalists and the Schwabs and, all that type of stuff. So that's a real worry, folks. We don't need that. These cats have more power than they need right now, and we don't need to give them any more. And so it's tough, but I guess we want to see Trudeau in there until he rides that Liberal ship right into the ground. And puts them below the NDP or the Bloc or whatever in terms of seats in the next election. But Carney, I think, has the potential to be even worse than Trudeau. So we have to be very mindful of that.
He's insane. I've listened to him talk. He's out of his mind. But he's, like you said, he is intelligent and out of his mind. When you got somebody who has intelligence and is a left-wing nutcase, wow, look out, Canada. So if he gets in, I would strongly recommend you all get out, because there's still, in my view, in Canada, there's still a chance that they're going to pull some new COVID variant on Canadians in October of next year. That would allow them to cancel the federal election in November of next year. I have no doubt in my mind that they do not want Pierre Poilievre to become prime minister so that he can pretend to be conservative and pretend to work with Trump. I think they're going to do their very best to stop the election. Now, again, you've served in politics in Parliament for 18 years. Let's get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I think that part of the thing that happened during COVID was it was a justification to be able to send out and distribute tons of mail-in ballots, which subverts the election process. And I think that is, case in point, exactly what they would do with some other variant to be able to justify sending out tens or hundreds of thousands or millions of mail-in ballots to be able to stuff the ballot boxes. So yeah, that's a real problem. Like we really do need to curtail the subversion and the undermining of the electoral process. We have to go back to something that's simple. I'm not saying that it's impossible to cheat paper ballots. When Richard Nixon was watching the results come in 1960 from his headquarters, he saw that nothing was being posted in the city of Chicago, huge city. And he asked his people, he said, why aren't we seeing any postings in Chicago? And they said, well, Daley, the mayor of Chicago, is waiting to see the rest of the ballots coming in from the rest of the state of Illinois. And then he knows how many he has to cheat by to deliver Illinois and its electoral college votes to Kennedy. And that's exactly what happened, and Kennedy won. But Nixon knew not to challenge it because he knew that Daley would lie through his teeth and would admit that he cheated the election and what happened in Illinois. So paper ballots can be cheated, folks. That it happened. Okay, that does happen. But if you allow for electronic tabulation and mail-in ballots and vouching or statutory declarations or any of these various things, tons of advanced polling, et cetera, you are just opening it up and not having identification, whatever. You're opening it up to cheating on a massive scale. And of course, for the parties that look like they're going to lose, they want that. That's exactly what they want.
Well, I recall in history class, they did talk about the cheating that took place in Chicago. Where there was a couple of documentaries we had a chance to watch. This is back when education, it was never good in Canada, but at least we still got one. Yeah, they never were trying to teach us that boys are girls and girls are boys. But you're right. If it happened back then, it could certainly happen now. It'd be easier for it to happen now. But here's another question I've got, because a lot of people ask me my opinion on this, and my opinion has been made very clear. And I've had lawyers complain to judges in Canada about me calling on a foreign government to liberate Canada. And with Trump taking office, I'll do the same thing again. Please, Uncle Trump, please annex Canada and imprison every single liberal nut job in there. Now, the reason I say this is because Americans don't know this, is that radical Islam runs Toronto and all the surrounding cities. We're talking about Scarborough, Vaughan, Mississauga, Brampton, Milton, Oakville, Pickering, Whitby. All those cities are run by radical Islam. Canada is kind of like an aircraft carrier, allowing radical Islamists to arrive in those areas and then just walk across the U.S. border. Now, Trump, is there, as a seasoned politician in Canada, is there any advice that you would give Trump on how to handle radical Islamists being welcomed into Canada by Trudeau and being encouraged to go to the States and commit heinous crimes by Trudeau? What's the advice you would give to Trump to deal with that? Please, let's hear your thoughts.
Sure. Well, it reminds me when Ambassador Paul Cellucci, who was appointed by W. Bush, said exactly what you're talking about in terms of an aircraft carrier sitting off the coast, type of thing. Because at that time, we had Mujahideen Khalq that was operating out of Montreal, and they had media spokespeople. You know, it was a sophisticated operation. They were sending their operatives across the border into the United States, and one of their guys was caught, going down to try to do damage to LAX, etc. And this is decades ago. And of course, the numbers and the intensity of that stuff have only gotten even more so the case now than they were then. So you have to put pressure on the government in Canada to do the right thing. Like, I think Mr. Trudeau, Justin, qualifies as a traitor. I really believe that. If you buy 8 jabs for every man, woman, and child in Canada, and children don't need jabs, and not that anybody did, but certainly children. When you buy that many, after you already know that China has taken coronavirus from your Winnipeg laboratory and weaponized it and added gain of function to it at the Wuhan laboratories and bought those weaponized jabs off of China, you might be able to pretend that you're an idiot with regard to what was going on at the Winnipeg lab, but after the CSE and CSIS, RCMP have informed you that that's exactly what went on, and then you buy those jabs off of them, that's traitorous. Like, I can't think of any other way to characterize that. So whether it's the RCMP that lays charges in that case, or if it's the Americans because he's violated any type of arrangement that we've got security wise with them, there's that. Trudeau's riding in Papineau in Montreal has the largest percentage Muslim in all of Canada, and his brother is a convert. That tells you a lot. And, Omar Al-Gabra, who was his ambassador, if you will, into that political entity, was Muslim Brotherhood and whatever. I mean, it really changed the tenor of the Liberal caucus. Like, up until that time, what would happen is, there were people who were of Arabic or Islamic, et cetera, backgrounds, like Mac Harb, who was an MP in the Ottawa area. But, there still were people like Senator David Smith or, et cetera, that were in the caucus that gave a different perspective with regard to the Middle East. and kind of won the day, if you will, inside the Liberal caucus. But once Omar Al-Gabra got elected, that fundamentally changed the Liberal caucus, because now this guy was reporting back to the imams in some of these areas that had significant Islamic populations. And so now the imams were willing to mobilize their mosques against Liberal MPs that weren't towing the line, as it were, or would say one thing at the mosque to get the votes for the nomination of the general election, but then vote or speak differently inside the Liberal caucus or what was going on in parliamentary proceedings in Ottawa. So that was a fundamental change. And I think unseating Mr. Trudeau would be a big help for solving some of these issues, because his riding is so stilted. But, Mr. Al-Gabra was another factor, and there's others.
Okay, so for again, our American friends, this is Omar Al-Gabra, who is Muslim Brotherhood, and who made it very clear that he wanted to have every Canadian woman wrapped up in burqas, that he wants Sharia law to be prevalent and the main law of Canada. This guy was somehow the transport minister of Canada for a while, but like Rob is saying, was reporting to the radical Islamist imams about which Muslims were not radicals. Now, isn't that sick?
Or even which Liberal MPs weren't as fervent in advancing their issues as they would want, right? And let me point out that in my riding, for example, my former riding at Calgary West, we had a Islamic center that's Saudi Arabian funded with Wahhabi clerics. The Wahhabs are known as kind of one of the more militant branches of Islam. They're the ones who gave the impetus, if you will, with Lawrence of Arabia to remove the House of Saud from the Ottoman Empire and stuff in the First World War. These when they showed up in a nomination that I had, for example, 550 signed up, 440 voted. That's an 80% voter turnout. I've done a lot of get out the vote efforts in my time in politics, and I will tell you that, normally it's maybe 50, 60%. If you do a really good job on get out the vote, you'll get in the high 60s, maybe 70s. I've never run into a population where you can do an 80% voter turnout. Like that's a rare thing. That is an outlier on the bell curve in terms of turnout. So if they have those types of turnouts, you can imagine the influence that has in nominations and general elections. Like now, for example, in Ontario, they have their own dedicated political party.
For those who maybe don't understand Canadian politics, there is this absolutely bizarre movement within Canada by white people to take away the rights of specifically and only other white people, to even criticize the fact that Communist China runs the west coast of Canada and that radical Islam runs Toronto and the entire surrounding area. You've got about 6 million Canadians are completely under the influence of radical Islam. Now, potentially, the next premier of the province of Ontario, which houses the cities of Ottawa and Toronto, Niagara Falls, London, Windsor, Sudbury, North Bay, Thunder Bay, and so on, it's pretty significant. You're talking 14.5 million people will be conceivably next election under the rule of Bonnie Crombie, who is a white woman who professes to be a Polish national, who is completely bought and paid for by radical Islam and is an absolute purveyor of Sharia law. So when she wins, a white woman wins this thing, she will pretty much be the one who's responsible for it becoming legal to marry a 6-year-old girl in Canada. And the part that bothers me the most is that other white people say, oh, Bonnie Crombie, she's a woman. It's time to have women rule everything. She's great because she's a woman. That is how Canadians think. It is absolutely bizarre that nobody is looking into the fact that I'd say every politician in the Liberal Party and the New Democratic Party in Canada is completely bought and paid for by radical Islam. I mean, the Democrats, they already proved that with Barack Obama. He was a Muslim, and nobody paid attention to that. So I'm not saying I hate Muslims. What I'm saying is the ideology on the radical side, which is essentially followed by over 375 million Muslims, is now the dominant force in Canada's biggest city and biggest region. And Americans need to be concerned about that. So should we ask Uncle Trump to please annex Canada? I don't know. Your thoughts?
Well, I remember I was down on the McCain campaign when he was the last lone man standing against Barack Obama. I was down in Washoe County in Nevada campaigning in that election. And the only time where we led for the Republicans in the final stages of that campaign was when they were running radio ads with his middle name, which was Barack Hussein Obama, and talking about him being trained at a madrasa in Indonesia. And that was the only time we led. But of course, there were politically correct types who said, oh, boo hoo hoo, you can't draw attention to that. And so then when those ads got pulled, we slipped back and we actually lost the state of Nevada right next to John McCain's home state of Arizona. I also want to point out, because you referenced China with regard to entryism and subversion and affecting the political process. In this last election in British Columbia, where now it looks like the NDP is going to have to forfeit one of their seats to have them be speaker, and then there's going to be a tie in the legislature for the Greens and the Conservative Party. I know somebody who was a very, very senior campaign operative for John Rustad and the BC Conservatives, who, when the Liberal Party looked like it was collapsing, and indeed it was, because they folded and endorsed Rustad and hoped that some of their MLAs would be able to fall under the banner, the Chinese reached out to operatives that I know in BC politics, hoping that they could migrate their influenced MLAs over from the BC Liberals into the BC Conservatives so that they wouldn't lose influence in the BC legislature. And they were willing to pay money to do it. That's incredibly telling of the nature of the interference, subversion, control, foreign interference, etc. Like this, it's very real. It's very, very real, folks.
So corruption, as we talked about here, corruption in Canada and the United States is rampant. It's just they try their very best to hide it. And they've got, here's the problem for all of us, the liberal media on their side to hide it. And for anybody in the United States who doesn't understand Canadian media, all of it is far left. All of it. Every news outlet, whether it's radio, TV, print, internet, it's all far left liberal. The only conservative voices out there are just individual people who talk in front of a banner or talk out of their cars. They tend to, of course, be a lot more accurate than any newspaper in Canada. And in 2017, there was a bribe that was placed out to the tune of $580 million that the Liberal Party, Justin Trudeau, gave to all the liberal media saying, hey, guys, insult everybody who's Christian, insult everybody who's on the conservative side of the argument, insult Rob Andrews there, insult Kevin J. Johnston here, Chris Sky, Pat King, Archer Pawlowski, and so on, and do it nonstop, which they've done. That was one hell of a bribe to all the media. There were 1,500 media outlets in Canada that got this bribe to make sure that left-wing ideology, like being pro-pedophilic and pro-drag queen in front of kids and pro-radical Islam and anti-Christian and anti-white and anti-male and pro-feminist, all that trash has been just hammered into Canadians' heads for the last 8 years. So, and there's no alternative.
Yeah, I did a campaign to defund the CBC. And I had the friends of the CBC who came out and mobilized against me in my nomination in Signal Hill. They didn't like it very much. But, when you think about, like, they were willing to raise millions of, they were willing to use millions of our taxpayer dollars to defend Jian Ghomeshi, right? Because he was a somehow a sacred, product of the CBC and his sexual peccadillos or whatever. Like it just goes to show you how warped and twisted that all is. And there was a guy that I sat in I guess you'd call it a lecture or an interview with, Joe Bourgault, and his group interviewed this fellow. He was a former CBC journalist. He was disgusted by the totally slanted view that the CBC and frankly other broadcasters as well did during COVID to basically not check, to not validate, to not verify, etc., editorialize, COVID and jabs and mandates and all this type of stuff. And I give him credit because he broke ranks with his former CBC colleagues and called them out on it and wrote a book about it. But I mean, it's really disgusting. And now when you have as many options as you do with regard to media, whether it's internet or satellite or whatever, like, why the hell we're subsidizing this thing to the tune of billions of dollars? It just doesn't make any sense. Well, it's just control. That's what it is. It's control. That's what it is. That's what it is.
Totally. And of course, during COVID, Rob, I think you remember I put this book out here, Masks Are Bullshit. And well, I got arrested for it because you can't save the lives of Canadians in Canada. If you want to get a free copy, everybody, head over to my website right now, kevinjjohnston.com, and hit the book section. You'll see the codes there, KJJ Instagram 1 for the ebook and KJJ Instagram 2 for the audio book. Go ahead, download it. It's free of charge. It was written to be a very offensive 80s stand-up comedy routine. But imagine you put a book out talking about the fact that there's no pandemic. Everything in the book, even though it's hilarious, is still factual. And I got arrested for it 2 days after it was released. Now, they released me a couple of hours later, but I still had to sit in the back of a police car with my hands cuffed behind my back. And I don't know if you've been in the back of a Canadian police car, but I'm only 5'6". My knees were in my stomach. I had a tough time breathing, and I didn't have the room to get my cuffs underneath my legs to bring them forward. Those cars are brutal. So they just made me sit there.
Well, a lot of my good friends, whether it's yourself or John Carpe or Arthur Pawlowski or the Coots boys, I've sat in court with some of them. I've broken bread with some of them, down at the courthouses in southern Alberta, etc. I've been down at the border in Coots and Milk River, etc. A lot of my friends have done jail time. I know they tried. The CRA certainly tried to hand out some jail time to me, but it was all thrown out of court. And I wouldn't plea on any of this stuff because it was all BS. But it's a travesty where this country's gone. And I have to think there are the odd liberals, for example, Stephen Ledrew, who the CRA, bankrupted literally because he wanted the Liberal Party to live up to the Constitution. And they went after him. Broke him, effectively in terms of his financial situation. And he said, right. To give him credit, he said, I wouldn't have done anything differently. But it was all politics, and also some guys that he has on his shows and whatever, like Dan McTeague, who documents, what's going on with regard to gasoline prices and whatnot. And they've openly called for Justin Trudeau to be removed. And I hope that more Liberal MPs realize he is the death knell for the party. And either sign a letter or speak up in caucus to say he's got to go.
Well, we saw it happen in Canada, where in the province of Ontario, Kathleen Wynne, the bizarre lesbian that insisted on teaching anal sex to grade 4 students, her party almost lost party status. In fact, I think it did because they only got 8 seats in all of Ontario, which for some reason, the Conservative leader gave them back their status. What an absolute idiot. The liberalism has to die. It has to go away. And I'm going to just address this one with you now, is liberalism. It has to be mental illness, because anybody who's part of the Democrat Party, it seems, and the Liberal Party in Canada, it seems, and who has left-wing leanings, it seems, do not create anything. They destroy everything. They argue everything. They turn everything that's fun into boring garbage. And They even are going out of their way to destroy everything that even men just like Star Wars, for example. Have you seen what they've done to that? Star Trek, have you seen what they've done to that? Any TV show out there, look what they've done to that. And they're just continuing this onslaught of doing their very best to feminize men and masculinate women. It's not working. Our society is crumbling because of all this liberalism and left-wingism. How, I mean, with Trump in office, great, but how do we actually defeat this? Was it, first off, two-part question. Was it ever left-wing when you were in office, and how do we defeat it? Go ahead.
Well, I'm going to talk about the U.S. and then come back to Canada. When the Kennedys, Robert Kennedy and John Fitzgerald Kennedy, were reforging, if you will, the Democratic Party, because previous to them, the Democratic Party had a huge component of the Boll Weevil South, the Southern Democrats, the Dixiecrats, etc. When they forged new coalitions because they were Catholic and were bringing in a lot of inner city immigrants, etc. When they recast that party, it was a new coalition building strategy for the Democrats. Now, what's interesting, what happened in the U.S. in this last election is you had a man who was literally the living epitome and manifestation of the Kennedy coalition that was created in the 1960s in Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And the Democratic Party had so shifted to the left, had so become ideologically socialist that they rejected the winning formula, the very formula that Joe Biden, in a sense, kind of recast. Because if they'd had Bernie Sanders as the candidate, you can't take, a guy who's a very obviously, Jewish socialist, okay, and say to Polish Catholics, Irish Catholics, Puerto Rican Catholics, et cetera, Mexican Catholics, whatever, he's one of us. You can't do it. So the Democratic Party circled the wagons against Bernie because they realized that they couldn't construct a coalition around him. And they gave it to Biden, who you could construct falsely, because he's not really that Catholic, right? But falsely construct a Kennedy-esque coalition around. But then when you get an actual Kennedy, who is a rebirth manifestation of the Kennedy coalition from the 1960s, they reject even him, right? So the Democratic Party, if it went back to its more traditional roots, would have embraced and allowed RFK Jr. to run. But that just tells you how far gone the party is compared to what its roots have been. I remember in Canada, for example, when we had Doug Fisher, who was a CCF member of Parliament, going back to the 1950s, previous to the NDP being created in 1961. Preston Manning invited him into some of our early Reform Party stuff, and he sat in on some of our shadow cabinet meetings. The thing to understand about that is that this is a man who was considered left-wing CCF in the 1950s. And his perspective, when I met him and got to know him and invited him by the office for milk and cookies and, whatever, in the 1990s, he was to the right of the Reform Party caucus and most of its constituents, most of its MPs and members. Okay, that just shows you how far it's all drifted. So, you'd have to go back to, I'm just like Louis Saint Laurent. Louis Saint Laurent was, the liberals of the old school who believed in free trade, classical liberalism, etc. But that party has shifted so much. Like Pearson was a sellout on that stuff. And then Trudeau, like both the Trudeaus have effectively, got rid of any of that traditional classical liberalism that they would understand in a European context. I mean, yeah, you'd have to go back to almost Louis Saint Laurent. I knew RCMP officers who voted for Louis Saint Laurent because they liked his free trade policies over the protectionism of the Conservatives back in the 50s.
Is it possible, knowing the history lesson here, is it possible to bring left-wing thought processes to an end? Is that ever something that we can abolish from our society, whether through law, through war, through education, through anything? Can it happen?
You know what a great story I heard? There was a guy who, as a young man, was applying to the Foreign Service. And a senior kind of grizzled Foreign Service officer asked him, he said, "What's your background? What's your worldview? Et cetera." And this young man said, "Well, I kind of lean left. I'm kind of, progressive. I see the value of, social democracy or democratic socialism or whatever. And this wizened old Canadian diplomat said, "Oh, okay, all right. Well, we're going to assign you 3 countries. And, you're going to spend 2 years in the first and 2 years in the second and 2 years in the third. And then after that, we'll have a meeting again and figure out kind of where you're at and what you think of diplomacy and serving in the Foreign Service, etc." And so the first country he got sent to was Czechoslovakia, and it was the late 60s. And he got to see the Soviet tanks come in and crush the students and kill people and everything that was the Prague Spring getting crushed. And then after that, he was sent to Poland, and he got to see the repressive regime there, which was even more repressive than what he had seen in Czechoslovakia. And then for the next 2 years, he was sent to Moscow, and he got to see how even whatever freedoms that there were still left in Poland were extinguished and the human spirit totally crushed in Moscow. And then he came back to meet that senior wizened old civil servant, after 6 years abroad. And the old civil servant asked him, he said, "So what do you think now?" And the guy said, "I have had my eyes opened. I understand how evil it is. I understand how soul-crushing it is. And my views have fundamentally changed, and I embrace freedom." I think Canada's problem is we have this longest undefended border in the world and trade relationship with the United States. Who pays the price for defending freedom in the world? And we have grown up as this spoiled brat next to it. Who enjoys the benefits of its hard work and its productivity, and it's shedding its sons and daughters' blood on foreign soil for freedom. And I think if more Canadians spent time in North Korea or China or Cuba, etc., and got to see it for what it really is. Like, I used to have kids who came into my office and they would say, "Oh, Mr. Anders, can we have some little Canada flag pins? We're going off to, wherever." And I would say, "Okay, well, we'll give you 10 or 100 or whatever. But if I give you 100, I want you to come back when a year from now or whenever your time is done, whether it's, foreign affairs or if it's, whatever it is, I want you to come back and tell me about your experiences and what you've learned." And every single time they came back realizing that corruption and waste and top-down oppressive government was terrible, and they got to see it in these various regimes. Now, Canada has our own version of tyranny and oppression, and you and I have both faced it. We know many of our friends have as well. Yes. But people need to understand when a guy like me or a guy like you warns them about central bank digital currency or not using cash or BRICS or any of these things, if you spend time in places like a Cuba or a North Korea or a China, etc., and you experience what that totalitarianism is like, then you get it. But otherwise, you just think that you can wear your Che Guevara t-shirt and the government's going to give you everything for free, and you can smoke your marijuana, and somebody else is paying the bills. It doesn't work that way.
And Che Guevara was a murderer, and it's amazing how many left-wing nuts love the guy. They just love him. Yeah, they're in the neighborhood I was living in Calgary before I left Canada permanently. There was a guy that had Che Guevara painted on his garage door, which faced the main drag. Oh my God! So I asked him, why? Just tell me why. Because he's a hero and a freedom fighter. And, okay. And he couldn't tell me that without being angry, just shouting at the top of his lungs. So liberalism tends to make people angry. You ever notice how when people join groups like Antifa, Black Lives Matter, the Communist League, they're never happy, that they're always shouting at the top of their lungs that their ideology is the best and that ours sucks, but we're the ones smiling, having a brew after they're done screaming, and they're still screaming while we've gone home and got into a nice warm bed. It is lunacy to think about how angry these people are and how little it ever does to improve their lives. And I don't think that we can get it through to these left-wing nuts just how bad this ideology is for their own futures. Again, I got to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's the politics of envy and jealousy, right? And coveting what your neighbor has. My social studies teacher in high school, Mr. Bergstrom, had a great analogy for this. And he said, it's easy to teach communism. You gather some people under a coconut tree, give them some AK-47s, point to the rich guy's house on the hill and say, let's just go take it. Let's redistribute his wealth. Okay. That's easy. That's an easy lesson. But to understand Adam Smith and, the wealth of nations and supply and demand and Milton Friedman, that takes more understanding. They're powerful lessons, whether it's Henry Hazlitt or some of these other great economists, that need to be taught, because communism's easy. It's just the politics of envy.
Yeah, it's crazy. So now let's cover something else, and we're coming to our last couple of minutes here, so we may as well. 'Tis the season coming up here. Christmas is on its way. For those who may not know, West Edmonton Mall, until the Arabs decided to compete with North America, was the biggest shopping mall in the world. It literally is 1 mile wide. And inside it actually has a really good water park, I will admit, and go-karts. It used to have a submarine ride inside. So there is some cool stuff in there, but I'm not a retail guy, so the only thing I go for is the water park. But this huge shopping mall now is having diverse Santa. So Santa will be white on one day, black on the next, yellow on the next, brown on the next, red on the next, and so on. They're going to rotate it because apparently a white mythos is just not allowed to happen anymore. What's going to happen with Krampus? Will they make Krampus black and then Asian and so on? I don't get it. So I just want to say that left-wingism is ruining everything, including Easter and Christmas and Ash Wednesday and so on. But I just want to let everyone know this is Panama. We have a lovely 30-foot tall tree in one of the malls here. Every shopping mall now has Christmas. Christmas spirit is already here. It's not even December yet. Here's another one. This is called Albrook Mall. This mall is 1.1 kilometers wide. They've got the Nutcracker Suite men out there. They got Christmas trees absolutely everywhere. This is a photograph from last Christmas where the Panamanians get together and sing Christmas carols in English around these Christmas trees in the mall. So, Rob, last question for you. How is it that Canada, the United States, has walked away and destroyed its own culture, but every other country out there is actually embracing American and Canadian culture? Go. Your last thought of the day.
Well, Yuri Bezmenov, who was a defector from the KGB, talked about how subversion was working powerfully in the United States and in Western countries to subvert our culture. And I think we need to appreciate the values that Christianity imbues in our civilization, and maybe not even Santa, but, as they say, Espanol, Feliz Navidad, and to embrace Mary and Joseph and Jesus as the basis of Christmas. Christianity is a big deal, and we best not throw the baby out with the bathwater, even if people don't subscribe to all the tenets of it. So many things about our society, whether it's, the idea that you stop to allow an ambulance to pass so somebody can get to the hospital, et cetera. Those are all based on, being a good Samaritan, et cetera, do unto others as you'd have to do unto you. These are beautiful Christian values that we need to preserve and cherish. Oh,
I agree 100%. Rob, we're out of time. Tell everybody who you are one more time and how they can reach you. Go ahead.
Rob Anders. How do they reach me? Well, Facebook. How about that? I've got the Silver Billy cowboy hat from my grandfather.
All right, everyone. So Rob Anders, former member of Parliament, a guy who stood toe-to-toe with Justin Trudeau. And I feel sorry for you on that. That couldn't have been a good experience.
Well, he's a doozy.
Yeah, he's a doozy. We'll leave it at that. We'll definitely leave it there. Rob, a pleasure to see you as always. Thanks for being here. Greatly appreciate it.
All the best.
All right, take care. Wow, God, this guy, he knows everything. It doesn't matter what you ask him, he knows it. I'm willing to bet if I was to ask Rob Anders how I could make a wheel the way that they did in 500 BC, that he'd know. And he'd know exactly what tool to use and exactly how much pressure to put on the hammer to get it to work. That's why I love Rob Anders, everybody, is that he is very well versed in world politics, banking, and in general, world history. To have a conversation with Rob Anders, even on a personal scale, it's a wonderful thing. And we're very lucky to have had him come in here to talk to us about currency, BRICS, and the possible future that we could have if we all maybe smarten up just a little bit. I want to say thank you to all the Americans who joined us tonight. Really do appreciate you being here. My name is Kevin J. Johnston. I am Canada's #1 podcaster and biggest mouth, and I am the guy that had to escape Communist Canada because of all the attempts on my life just for being a big mouth podcaster. It's unbelievable. And I want to say thank you to the people of Panama for welcoming me here and giving me a home here. It's a wonderful country with wonderful people. It's sad that I can't go back to my country and not get killed when I go, but things are what they are. I'm not going to cry about it. I'm going to move forward and bring to the table everything that I do, and that's my skill set to help all of you save money with your taxes. So if you want to get your taxes done, I can go back 10 years in Canada and get you back every penny that you've ever paid in tax. And if you have a corporation in the United States that has a lot of IRS and state tax debt, get a hold of me. I can buy it from you, take it off your shoulders completely, and send all of you back to zero so you do not have any debts any longer. My name is Kevin J. Johnston. This is the Kevin J. Johnston Show that runs every single Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time right here on freedomreport.ca. I love you all, and good night.